Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. At this time, we ask that you turn off all cellular devices. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening, everyone. Well, welcome to the Air Force One Pavilion at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. My name is Tony Penny, and I am the Chief Learning Officer here at the Foundation. It's tradition that we begin each program with the Pledge of Allegiance, so I invite you to please stand and join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Now, before we get started with our national championship, I wanted to quickly thank the many people who have made this evening possible. These past 17 months have been among the most challenging many of us have seen in our lifetime. The impacts of the pandemic, social unrest, political challenges, and more have been, to put it mildly, significant. In the course of a week or two here at the museum, we were forced to shut down the museum, our school tours, and our speech and debate competitions and move them completely to virtual environments. So tonight not only marks the culmination of a virtual series of competitions that has taken place across the country since February, but it also marks the first in-person student event that we've been able to host since we shut down our field trip program in March of 2020. So we are very excited that this is the first one that we've been able to have back. So thank you. To quote the Beatles, it's been a little bit of a long and winding road. And it's only because of the extraordinary commitment, ingenuity, and flexibility of so many that we were able to navigate these challenges and offer this opportunity the past couple of years. So I want to begin tonight with a little bit of gratitude to the folks who made tonight possible. So first, I want to thank the hosts of our regional competitions, who aren't here, but we want to thank them anyways. Are in Los Angeles, Christina Tulungen from Notre Dame High School. In Pflugerville, Texas, Kirsten Nash from Hendrickson High School. In Towson, Maryland, Charles Donovan from Blakefield High School. From Beaverton, Oregon, Chris Igawa at Southridge High School. Independence, Missouri, Jerry Willard at Truman High School. And New York, Brother John McGrory of Chaminade High School. So thank you to all of our regional partners. In addition to our regional partners, I want to say a special thank you to Dino Pape. Dino works for the National Speech and Debate Association and has been running our tab room all day long, so we are incredibly grateful to Dino. Thank you, Dino. And in addition to the regional competitions, we also held a national online competition open to students from across the country and partnered with the National Speech and Debate Association's U.S. Extemporaneous Speaking Competition to bring together 16 of the most talented speech and debate students in the country. So I want to thank all those partners as well. So thank you to our wonderful partners, to the students, the coaches, the volunteer judges, the supporters, the parents who made today possible. It would not be able to be here without all the support that you've had this past year. And I want to say a very special thank you to our staff here at the library. They have poured their hearts and souls into making this possible. They worked a number of weekends, incredibly long hours, stayed up late at night to bring these opportunities to students. So to all of our staff, the interns, and everyone else who supported, thank you very much. So after this challenging year and hundreds of students competing in regional qualifiers all over the past 5 months, the long and winding road is coming to its inevitable end. We're down to our final two. And very shortly, our national finalists will take the stage, and together we'll answer the question, who will be the next great communicator? But before I bring them up, I want to provide a little bit of context for the event to our audience. And I thought the best way to do that is to share a story So for all of our debaters, they've listened to many of President Reagan's stories. And so I have one last one before you head out later tonight. President Reagan was fond of telling stories, and as you may know, prior to his stint as the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan had quite a few jobs. He was governor of California, president of the Screen Actors Guild. He hosted a TV program called GE Theater. He was a sports radio announcer. And most important for this particular story, he was an actor. He starred in over 50 films with the motion picture studio Warner Brothers. It might seem strange to some of you based on the way that movies happen now, but in the early days of the motion picture industry, films were silent. They had musical scores, but the actors didn't talk. And so President Reagan liked to tell the story of when his boss, Harry Warner, founder of Warner Brothers Studio, first heard about a groundbreaking technology. President Reagan said, "You mind if I tell you a story? It happens to be about one of my old bosses, Harry Warner, back in the days of silent pictures. A technician came up to Harry, he was very excited, and he told him that there was a new breakthrough that had taken place that would make it possible to give soundtracks to motion pictures. And we'd have talking pictures." And Harry Warner stood there for a moment and said, "Who the heck wants to hear actors talk?" Advances and changes in human communication have long been inextricably linked to democracy. Whether we're talking about the printing presses of the American Revolution sharing Thomas Paine's common sense, the massive public debates between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, the way FDR used the radio to inform and comfort a nation reeling from a depression and then World War II, to televised presidential debates, to Google being synonymous for searching the internet for something, to Twitter, and now to Zoom, which has kind of ubiquitously means any kind of online meeting or class. Each advance in communication has meant it's been easier to communicate with more people, faster, rapidly extending the reach and impact of communication itself. But despite these advances in the scale and scope of communication, the basic goal of communication remains the same. As a former English teacher, before I came here, I spent 10 years as an English teacher, so I love words and the history of words. I'd be remiss not to point out that communication comes from the Latin communis, which is the same root as words like community and common. To communicate effectively means to build community around ideas, to search for links, to forge connections between people, ideas, and values. Effective communication is effective democracy. And here at the Reagan Foundation and Institute, that's our mission in education. It's to develop proactive, informed, educated, and conscientious citizens and leaders. To help develop the very sorts of informed and responsible students and citizens you're going to hear from in just a minute. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news the past few years or so, but it often appears that we have a decreasing supply of engaged and informed citizens, especially when it comes to those in Washington, D.C. To see the future is very, very bright. So the stakes of what you're about to see are pretty high. The winner tonight is going to receive a $5,000 scholarship. College is expensive, so $5,000 helps defray some of those costs. For those of you in the audience who may not be familiar with academic debate, I want to point out a few of the differences based on debates you may have seen on TV during previous election cycles for the presidency. And based on what I've seen from our competitors today, I think they could hold their own at the highest levels. So as you know, and Chris explained earlier, I think, the students, they're not coming up here to defend their own rigidly held political ideology. They're ready coming up here to debate both sides of the issue. In fact, sitting there right now, just moments away from who's going to be the national champion, they still don't know what side they're going to debate in front of all of you. But they're prepared because they are smart and they are wonderful. Our resolution tonight is this: the principle of peace through strength is as valid today as it was during Ronald Reagan's presidency. So we're going to flip a coin, and we'll figure out which side each student will represent. So whether you're one of our official judges, who I'll introduce in a moment, or you're trying to determine the winner here in the audience, or if you're watching online remotely, we ask that you put your personal opinion aside for a few moments and listen instead to the beauty of the argument that our two finalists are going to create. These students are making an argument for the sake of convincing you that they're right, so give them, give them the benefit of the doubt and listen to what they're saying. And I ask you to look for this because tonight you're going to help us select our next national champion. So before I introduce our two finalists, I'm going to introduce our final round judging panel. First, we have Kim Myers. Kim, wave to the crowd. There you go. Kim is a senior business analyst at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. In addition, she's a Region 4 advisor for Toastmasters in Missouri and a presentation consultant. She also debated in college and frequently volunteers her time to judge not only the Reagan debates, and she volunteered to judge many of our final rounds leading up to this, but local speech and debate tournaments as well. So thank you, Kim. Our next judge is Bob Gilbertson. Welcome, Bob. Bob is a former championship debater and national debate qualifier himself. Now he's a trial attorney who continues to use the skills he gained in debate. He has tried cases from Arizona to New Jersey and many, many places in between. He has tried cases involving patent infringement, trade secrets, contract disputes, personal injuries, fraud, and all manners of fires and explosions, which seems to fit in well with our topic tonight. For many years, he's been included in Best Lawyers in America, an annual peer-reviewed award that recognizes the top 6% of attorneys in the U.S. He's the managing partner of a new law firm that he and 7 other lawyers formed at the start of the year with offices in Minneapolis and Kansas City. So thank you, Bob, for joining us tonight. Next up, we have Rachel Hoff. Rachel is the policy director at the Ronald Reagan Institute, our offices located in Washington, D.C. Last fall, Rachel launched the Institute's Center for Freedom and Democracy. The center is especially near and dear to her heart, as her first political memory as a child was watching the fall of the Berlin Wall. There you go. Sounds like a fun, happy memory, right? The end of the Berlin Wall. In many ways, the capstone of President Reagan's legacy. So thank you, Rachel. And our last judge is someone who has an insider's perspective on what it means to be a great communicator. She joined the Reagan-Bush re-election campaign in 1984, was recruited to work in the Office of Presidential Advance in the Reagan White House. She was actually in Berlin to hear President Reagan demand that Secretary Gorbachev tear down this wall. So while Rachel was watching on TV, Joanne was actually there in person. President Reagan's former chief of staff and our current Chief Administrative Officer of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, please welcome Joanne Drake. Alrighty, and now the moment you've all been waiting for, the introduction of our 2 national finalists. So first up, a rising senior at Gabrielino High School in San Gabriel, California, Gabriel Frank McFeeder. Gabriel, come on down. And hailing from Greenville, South Carolina, recent graduate of Riverside High School, Laurel Hawley. Come on down. So I have in my, well, it's not in my pocket anymore. It was in my pocket a moment ago, a coin. On one side is President Reagan. On the other side is the presidential seal. President Reagan's head is heads. The presidential seal is tails. I'm going to ask Laurel to call it. Laurel?
I'll go heads.
Heads. All right, here we go. Oh. Go buy a lottery ticket. I don't think I could do that again if I tried 100 times. We're going to try this again. Still heads?
Yes.
There you go. It is tails.
I'll go next.
Gabriel has chosen the neg. Laurel's on the affirmative. Good luck to you both.
right. Can everyone hear me all right? I've heard that sometimes I'm too loud when speaking into microphones, so I'll do my best to hold the projection back a little bit. Before I begin, if I may, I want to start off with some super quick thank yous. Thank you to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute for having me here and teaching me all about a president who, frankly, I didn't know much about before I came this weekend. Thank you for opening my eyes to his legacy. I want to say thank you to my team, Riverside, Red Hot. Thank you to my coaches, especially Coach DeHessa, one of the biggest Ronald Reagan fans I know. Thank you for helping me get here today. And thank you so much to my family. You have quite literally been there for every single second of my life. Thank you for being here today. And I believe that about covers it. So with all that taken care of, my judges are ready. I'll go ahead and begin. In his acceptance of the endorsement of the Veterans of Foreign Wars in 1980, soon-to-be President Ronald Reagan established that peace is not obtained by wishing or weakness. He was making his case to take the reins of an America that had just emerged from a catastrophic conflict in Vietnam. An America staring down the communist Soviet Union that threatens democracy as we knew it. An America that was short on its military capabilities when facing the greatest menace yet. Upon his election as commander-in-chief, President Reagan wasted no time in laying out his foreign policy of peace through strength. The fortification of the American military in order to deter any Soviet attacks that would turn the Cold War hot. He expanded the size of the army, developed new weapons, began strategizing with the Strategic Defense Initiative to counter a nuclear attack. And when the Soviet Union began cutting troop deployments and ceasing nuclear production during President Reagan's second term, it was clear that peace through strength was triumphant and valid. Now, as the United States faces down the growing threat of China in what many have called the Second Cold War, it is clear that the principle of peace through strength is as valid today as it was during Ronald Reagan's presidency. The foundational concept behind peace through strength comes down to deterrence. Let's say I'm a general and you're a general. Your force is twice the size of mine in terms of manpower, and you have 5 times the ammunition. If I have any common sense, I'm going to turn right around, because I don't want to lead my men into a suicide mission. President Reagan replicated this concept on the world stage. He presided over the largest peacetime buildup of America's military to date, which the Soviets were unable to keep up with. It ran their economy dry and eventually resulted in Mikhail Gorbachev requesting a nuclear reduction treaty in 1987. Reagan's expansive military spending was valid, in other words, justified, by the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, peace through strength is emerging once again as a valid response as authoritarian states rise. America's enemy in the Second Cold War, China, is encroaching 1/3 of the world's free trade in the South China Sea, imposing an air defense zone in the East China Sea, aggressing the Philippines, coercing Vietnam, harassing Japan, trading gunfire with India in the Himalayas, and increasing pressure on Taiwan. All American allies. This is startlingly similar to the way the Soviet Union was approaching and building up buffer states around Russia. And China is doing all of this while increasing its military capabilities. Its navy is now the largest in the world, with names of weaponry that harken back to Star Wars. We're talking about maneuverable missile heads, hypersonic weapons, counter-space weapons, just to name a few. China's military buildup is nearly a carbon copy of that of the Soviet Union that President Ronald Reagan used peace through strength to dismantle. But threat like this is also coming from more than one enemy. The reincarnation of President Reagan's old enemy, Russia, has completely reformed its military, and for the first time since the end of the Cold War, is operating submarines off our East Coast. And this doesn't even begin to cover the processes of nuclearization that are occurring in North Korea and Iran, to name a few. President Reagan faced down a nuclear titan. Now America is facing down nuclear titans from all sides. The magnification of the threat that validated peace through strength in President Reagan's era clearly validates this principle once again. The magnification of the threat that peace through strength defeated necessitates this principle once again. President Reagan believed strongly in keeping America's military ahead of the curve. In commemorating the 40th anniversary of the invasion of Normandy, he pledged that we will always be prepared so that we may always be free. But we are facing a new threat that's catching us unprepared: cyber warfare. The U.S. Department of Defense categorizes the cyber world, digital data on American troop movements, the internet, my computer, your phone, as an area that the American military is responsible for defending. This means that peace through strength in form of fortification of America's cyber defenses is paramount. The Council on Foreign Relations reports that from 2005 to 2020, our government, public networks, and private companies have been targeted over 130 times. Most recently, Russian government hackers breached the Treasury and Commerce Departments, the State Department, the White House, and all 5 branches of our American military. So let's look at a personal example. The wife of a military serviceman, the mother to 2 children, found that one day her citizen email, unencrypted, unprotected, was receiving suspicious signals. A month later, she was told that it had been hacked by Russian forces, and she was one of 500 caught in the breach, her privacy being jeopardized along with that of her husband's life. The best way to prepare for war is to be prepared to win it. President Reagan's tried and true policy of peace through strength is the way to victory, because as he said himself, we will never again ask our men to fight and possibly die in a war that our government is afraid to win. Thank you.
Before I begin, I'd like to thank the Reagan Foundation for this great opportunity to come out here. I'd like to thank my school, Gabrielino High School, and my coaches there, Mr. Derek Yule, our head coach, Mr. Eric Chen, my extemp coach, who is directly responsible for me being here today, and Mr. Matthew Graca, our debate coach, who has helped me so much along the way. And of course, a big thanks to my family out in the crowd. You guys have been the most supportive throughout my speech and debate career. President Reagan once said, "Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means." It was upon this idea that President Reagan's principle of peace through strength was built. And Laurel described it correctly. It was the idea that by building up a strong US military that was globally active and globally updated, we would be able to fight communism against the Soviet Union. And it worked. Peace through strength created a new world. It toppled the Soviet Union, and President Reagan's economic policies created a new world of free trade and economic interconnectedness. I will agree with Laurel on the success of peace through strength in its time, but that is not the debate today. The debate today is whether, in that new world that President Reagan created, is peace through strength still as valid? And on the negative side, I am arguing that because of the success of this policy in the 1980s, the new world it created has so many more complications that peace through strength is simply not as valid and not as effective. Because of President Reagan's foreign policy, the Soviet Union, nor any singular nation or ideology, is our sole enemy in the modern foreign policy debate. Instead, terrorism remains the most tangible threat to American lives and peace across the world. According to Brown University, we've spent $6.4 trillion in the Middle East on our military in the fight against terrorism. You'd expect all this strength to create a lot of peace. But unfortunately, the opposite has been true. Worldwide, 415,000 people have died to terrorist attacks since 9/11. 650,000 died in the Iraq War alone. 241,000 died in the Afghanistan War. 7,000 American soldiers lost their lives in the fight against terror. That's double than the number of Americans who lost their lives on September 11th. And unfortunately, their sacrifices seem to have been in part in vain. Because the fact of the matter is that since 2010, we have seen the number of terrorist incidents worldwide double. If you are a terrorist, you will not be stopped by the US's military strength because you don't care. And for that reason, because terrorism has become the new amorphous military threat of today's day and age, and peace through strength has only increased war, and increased violence, not actually deterred terrorism, it does not remain as valid of an ideology today as in President Reagan's time. Of course, as Laurel does, parallels can be drawn between present-day Russia and China and the former USSR. However, it's important to understand that in this new era of economic interconnectedness that President Reagan ushered in, China and the US, Russia and the EU are now economically reliant on one another, whether it be for manufactured goods or for oil. Attacking the other is economic suicide. In the era of fierce embargoes of President Reagan's day, this wasn't the case. And for that reason, when we threatened strength, we meant it. But today, our strength is unable to be used, and for that reason, unable to create peace. 2008, Russia invades part of Georgia, a major US ally. 2014, Russia invades Crimea for oil resources, another major ally, as it is part of Ukraine. 2020, China invades Himalayan territory in Kashmir, claimed by one of our biggest allies, India. Laurel herself admits this in her speech. We have the largest military in the world, larger than the next 10 nations combined. Yet it has been unable to deter the conflict, whether it be in Kashmir or the South China Sea, that Laurel itself admits is happening. And when it comes to the South China Sea, the unfortunate reality is that our US military there has been unable to deter violence and has only been able to see moderate stops in the region. More specifically, just earlier this month, China drove away a US warship stationed off the coast of the Philippines in disputed water. Not the other way around, because China knows that we cannot attack back. And for that reason, because peace through strength ushered in a very different world than President Reagan could have imagined during his presidency, the fact of the matter remains that our largest enemies, terrorists in the Middle East and Russia and China, don't care about our strength and are only violating the peace.
All right, if everyone's ready, we'll go ahead and kick it off. President Ronald Reagan liked to say, the United States has never gotten in a war because we were too strong. Maintaining this ideal of peace through strength doesn't mean America is going around the world brutalizing other countries, but rather it means that America has strength and defense to back up its word. Strength and defense to protect the American citizens that President Reagan and you and I love so dearly. Today, first and foremost, let's talk about the threats that are facing our country that Gabriel brings up. We'll begin with terrorism. He says that terrorism is on the rise, with 2 times the amount of terrorism just in the past decade. But let's quickly note and be so very grateful for the fact that there has not been another 9/11. Peace through strength was something that was beginning to be kicked back into gear and magnified more than ever after the attacks on the Twin Towers, where the American military began its campaign in the Middle East, succeeding in the death of Osama bin Laden. Yes, there are wars that are continuing, but we would be doing our American fellow citizens and servicemen a disservice if we were to back away and let terrorism run rampant, which is the alternative that Gabriel leaves you to imagine. What we need to be doing is fortifying our American military and working different angles to cooperate and destroy this force of terrorism. And that's actually what Peace Through Strength provides for us, a flexibility. When he was introducing Peace Through Strength along the campaign trail in 1979, President Reagan defined it as this: peace is made by the fact of strength, economic, military, and strategic. The military is, of course, the baseline, allowing for America's trade ships, goods, and people to flow back and forth across the world unharmed and unhindered. But the economic strategy that is allowed by Peace Through Strength is equally as valuable. This economic strength and ability to use the military to influence economy around the world means that just as we can fight terrorism head on, we can also cut supply lines towards terrorist camps, begin waging warfare on them in ways that are less direct, in ways that might not threaten our American servicemen as much, but in ways that are equally as effective. But let's continue drawing some parallels. Moving forward, let's think back to how President Reagan came about. He was introducing the policy of peace through strength to an America that was behind the Soviet Union in terms of the amount of arms we possessed. The Soviet Union was ahead of us in almost all methods imaginable, and peace through strength was just that, a strong, gradual, roaring giant that built up through President Reagan's 8 years in office that allowed the American military to become on even playing ground and then surpass the Soviet Union. We're not solving problems just like that. It takes time, as all good things do. But when Gabriel points out to you situations about how attacking Russia and China would be suicidal for us because it would threaten our economy, let's consider how we wouldn't attack them head on, but how with peace through strength, we've been going through economic avenues. For example, trade wars. The trade war that we most recently had with China ending in the early months of 2020 actually resulted in China coming to the table to sign a treaty with us. Although COVID later ruptured it, now as COVID-19 is moving forward and exiting our world, most hopefully, it appears that once again, peace through strength in the form of economic means is growing equally as valid and justifiable. Because he talks to you about how the United States is ineffective in the South China Sea because our battleship was driven off once. But I would argue that when 1/3 of the world's trade is allowed to move freely thanks to our American military bases that are placed there, we can undoubtedly justify the fact that we have our American military present. It's all about validation. It's all about justification. And when one American life or thousands of American lives are made better, I think both President Reagan and I would agree that this is valid. Thank you.
At the beginning of her first speech, Laurel mentions that peace through strength was designed during President Reagan's time when America was short on its military capabilities. She's right. The difference, and the reason why it's not as valid today, is because we're not short on our military capabilities today. As I mentioned before, we have greater military funding than the next 11 nations combined. Even in the new realm of cybersecurity, we recently doubled our funding into cybersecurity as part of the new defense budget bill. Yet, that did not achieve peace. Cybercrimes have continued, as Laurel mentioned. Russia has continued to put submarines in our waters, as Laurel mentioned. China has invaded the Himalayas and parts of the South China Sea, as Laurel mentioned. In the Obama administration, we spent about $550 billion on the military. In the current Biden administration, we're spending almost $200 billion more than that. We are upgrading our strength as we speak. So why aren't we seeing more peace? That's the fundamental question that judges are going to ask themselves today, and why they're going to be siding with the negative in today's debate. Because ultimately, despite increases in strength, we are only seeing increases in tension, not in peace. More specifically, let's talk about terrorism. Firstly, Laurel says that it doesn't mean intervening in countries. That's not what peace through strength is about. But President Reagan acknowledged that is what it was about. President Reagan launched a successful intervention into Grenada that worked because Grenada was a small, tiny communist nation. My point being, peace through strength worked against communism. It doesn't work against terrorism. Secondly, she says there hasn't been another 9/11. And while I'm fortunate for that being the case, the fact of the matter is that more Americans have lost their lives to terrorism than lost their lives on 9/11 since 9/11, and more American soldiers have lost their lives, nearly double the number, fighting terrorism than died to terrorism on 9/11. So clearly, our strength has failed to create peace in the fight against terrorism. I don't disagree with her that if we completely got rid of our military, it would probably lead to even more terrorism. But that's completely irrelevant to today's debate. The question is not whether or not we should decrease military funding or anything like that. The question is simply whether or not our strength today is creating peace as effectively as it did during President Reagan's term. Because terrorism exists, and because it is only increasing despite our strength, clearly it is not as effective. Don't let any arguments about what the alternative would look like if we withdrew our military deceive you. Secondly, let's talk about Russia and China. She says that the trade war was successful and a good example of strength, but it wasn't. We just had a summit with President Xi Jinping and Biden, and it accomplished virtually nothing. Intellectual property theft remains rampant. China continues to abuse the rights of its Uyghur Muslims and other populations, and China continues to infringe upon the territorial coast in the Philippines, as well as infringe on human rights abuses in Hong Kong. Economic strength against China did not create peace. And Laurel fails to note my examples of Russia, both in their invasion of Crimea and Ukraine, in which, despite its massive military funding, Russia was not deterred. Because the fact of the matter is that, yes, Laurel is absolutely right that in the first Cold War, military strength was the way to victory. But in this new Cold War, military strength has only created more tensions. And the fact of the matter is whether or not you agree with whether or not we should increase or decrease our military funding, the question is whether or not our military strength today is as effective in that new Cold War as it was in the first. And clearly, because China and Russia are taking these actions and invasions of US allies that the Soviet Union would never have dared to have done in their time, peace through strength remains not as valid.
Okay, so starting on the affirmative, would that be all right with you if I started off?
Sounds good.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk briefly to the nature of peace through strength. Noting that in the Cold War, the USSR did make a variety of different headways in on Asia and Europe and the like, even with the presence of peace through strength. Look no further than Afghanistan and the invasion by the USSR, for example. Peace through strength wasn't watertight, but in the end, it won out. Why can't we hold peace through strength today to the same core value of this?
So I disagree with your initial characterization there. Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan actually started while President Carter was still in office. Peace through strength hadn't been fully adopted yet. Once peace through strength was adopted, the Soviet Union made no advances on European territory like they're doing today with Ukraine and Georgia. China made no advances on South China Sea territory like they're doing today, as you admit in your first speech. And that's why I'm fundamentally voting negative.
Absolutely. But really briefly, as a follow-up, when we're talking about Afghanistan, the USSR took quite a long time to pull back out, correct? So in a similar situation, if we were to draw a parallel to our fight against terrorism, for example, Rome wasn't built in a day. Peace through strength didn't result in the fall of the Berlin Wall in a day. Why can we not allow the same time process for peace through strength as it's being reinitiated now?
Well, it resulted in the fall of the Berlin Wall in about a decade. We've been spending 2 decades in our war against terrorism, and as I mentioned, it has only doubled the number of terrorist incidents worldwide. We've lost hundreds of thousands more in the fight against it than to it, and clearly our strength isn't creating peace. So can I ask a brief follow-up question?
Absolutely.
We've increased our military funding dramatically over the past 5 years, right?
Yes.
So then why have tensions with Russia and China also increased dramatically?
Thank you so much for asking that, actually. On to that point, yes, the United States may have been increasing our military funding, but let's look at the increments at which it was increased. We're increasing our military funding at far smaller amounts, marginal percentages, as opposed to Russia and China that are actually drastically increasing their military spending because they're working to catch up and surpass us. For example, you have China expanding its navy to now be the largest in the world. You had Russia with the invasion into Crimea, like you mentioned. This was critically because Russia wanted to gain access to a warm water port so that they would be able to be conducting these patrols off of our east coast. We can't ignore what Russia and China are doing and how closely that parallels the Cold War that peace through strength originated in. We're fighting ourselves at the beginning of a new one, so we need to start at the beginning of a new one. And as we're looking to re-implement peace through strength, looking at the beginning of, unfortunately, this second Cold War, it's clear that we're going to watch it run its successful course.
A brief follow-up. So US military spending has increased by over a third in the past 5 years. That's not a marginal number or a marginal rate. And that's even more than China and Russia have been increasing their military. So why specifically in the South China Sea, where we have military units stationed, has China been encroaching on territory like the Philippines?
I would argue first and foremost that encroachment isn't as drastic as you may think it is. First and foremost, because look around. 1/3 of the world's trade goes through the South China Sea. 1/3 of the world's trade is kept free directly because of the American military presence there. The food that we're going to eat tonight and the clothes on our backs are at such low prices, thankfully, because of this free trade, because we don't have tariffs that China is imposing in order to build up its own economic strength. Don't forget that peace through strength has an economic lens as well. And when we're looking at the economics of the situation in combination with the military as our foundation, I'm here to tell you that America is succeeding with this facet of peace through strength and beginning to build up on this militaristic one that we're seeing with the beginning of the Second Cold War.
Good evening. That was fantastic. I think probably the audience agrees with me. This is going to be really hard to decide. So I have a different question for each of you. I'm going to start with the NIG. It's 2021. You have given us a lot of information, which was incredible. But now I want you to define strength. What should strength be in this country?
So under President Reagan's idea, strength was having a well-updated, well-funded, and globally active US military. Obviously, as the negative, I don't think that's been as effective in the 21st century as it was in Reagan's time. So in my personal opinion, I think strength in the 21st century is a lot more economic, not necessarily through economic aggression, but through economic investment. China's been able to increase their strength primarily through the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a massive economic investment in Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of the world. I think if the United States started to look towards doing something the same, but for a good cause, democracy, that would be true strength. But it's not what President Reagan envisioned.
Okay, thank you. Laurel, I want you to define peace
Absolutely.
in 2021.
Peace in 2021, to me, as I'm an optimist, like President Reagan was, peace to me is a world where we're handling any form of conflict that we may have, any form of disagreement, by sitting down at a table and talking to each other. In my mind, peace can be achieved when we're sitting down and looking at each other, not as proponents of ideals or certain types of demographics, but as proponents for the human race, because at the end, we all bleed the same blood. Peace through strength, to me, when it comes down to the concept of peace, is a situation where we can come together without having the blood of our fellow citizens be shed, but rather understand that civility and discussion and communication are the ways for us to move forward in the world. And I'm a firm believer that we can make it a reality.
Great, thank you, and congratulations to both of you.
My first question is for Gabriel. It's been 40 years since Reagan was inaugurated, and the world has changed a great deal in the last 40 years. If President Reagan were president today, what do you think his foreign policy stance would be?
I think President Reagan would be very committed to deterring China by whatever means necessary, as they, I will agree with Laurel, are a comparable communist threat to the Soviet Union. But I don't think that foreign policy would look anything like what it was in the 1980s just because of that economic interconnectedness I'm talking about. I think it would look like counteracting the Belt and Road Initiative with economic investment across the Middle East and Africa. I think it would look like having diplomatic negotiations with China to attempt to try and reel in human rights abuses. I think it would look a lot more economically oriented in nature and a lot less militaristically oriented in nature.
Thank you. Laurel, my question for you is slightly different, but again, it's been 40 years. So today, if you were President Reagan, it could happen, maybe not with that last name, what would be your position if you had to choose one main area of focus? Cyber terrorism, terrorism, or the rise of China and North Korea? Which would be your main focus?
My main focus would be the rise of China and North Korea, because I believe that within those two countries, you encompass a great deal of the threats that America and the rest of the Western world might feel that it is facing. So, for example, you have China that is a communist force, something that the United States has stood against for an extremely long time. And you have a North Korea where the people aren't receiving enough to eat, where they've been locked away from the rest of the world in violation of human rights that, again, the United States stands as a bulwark to protect and promote. So when we're looking at issues of, for example, cyber terrorism, something that China, I believe, is a large perpetrator of. When we're looking at situations of terrorism even, which could be comparable to the acts of China against the Uyghur Muslims, that would be the first area I would focus upon, because that I believe by building a sort of relationship with China, not only through one summit, but through a variety of summits, because it does take time, just as President Reagan showed us with the persistence with which he pursued Soviet leaders, not just Gorbachev, but all of the ones before him. I believe that by communicating with China in forms of diplomacy, in forms of however many summits it might take, that we could resolve a lot of the different problems that are facing my United States if I were president.
I'm going to start with you, Laurel. You picked up there on an area that you've emphasized a lot, China, North Korea, and the way you deal with those sorts of threats. I'd like to give you a chance to respond to one that you haven't spent as much time on, and that's the terrorism point that Gabriel raises. You mentioned in your first speech, if you're a general and I'm a general, one way to deter is to show strength. But what if you're a general and I'm a terrorist? How do you apply the principle that you're speaking of to the example that Gabriel gives about the threat of terrorism?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I think in this situation, if I'm a general and you were, for example, a terrorist, obviously it's a different type of conflict. Terrorism is characterized by a lot of different strikes around the world. It's not a clear man-to-man, airplane-to-airplane type of battle that we might be used to seeing in country-to-country warfare. It's more similar to guerrilla warfare in that instance, striking randomly in different places at different times in ways unpredictably. And to use peace through strength to respond to that, I would use all three prongs of it that President Reagan laid out. First, let's go with the economics. Terrorist cells, for example, are extremely reliant on forms of food to keep the morale high, on their ability to connect with other people around the world by getting the valuable supplies they need, whether it be the supplies to build a pipe bomb or the lessons learned by people to learn how to fly planes. Economically, when we're talking about the stream of goods and materials into terrorist camps, although it may not be obvious at first, economically, the United States military has the ability to research, identify, and then cut off these trade flows, which in the beginning would begin to cripple them from the inside. But next, let's talk about the military. We can't let up on our military approach against terrorism because obviously that would lead to a variety of American and international lives being lost. But let it be known that I am also not a proponent of American servicemen losing their lives. In this situation, we would have to reevaluate our military approach and then go into a sort of situation where it's more anticipatory. And that involves us looking into social media, looking into databases in the dark web that terrorism actually likes to capitalize on largely. Social media has now become one of the largest recruiters of terrorists across the world and it's done a lot to bring new terrorists into these cells. So for us, we would use a more strategic military approach using this actual cyber command that I mentioned by the United States Department of Defense to go in and identify seeds where terrorism is beginning, where cells are beginning to be built. And last but not least, the strategy behind all this, the timing, who is employed where, who's going undercover, what supply flows are most critical. It's a painstaking process, but Rome wasn't built in a day. But it's a process that's comprehensive thanks to peace through strength. And that's how I would go about responding to it.
Thank you. Gabriel, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to the question that Joanne asked earlier about peace. And the reason I want to hear from you on that is that it strikes me that one of your points has been we're spending a lot of money on strength and not seeing the peace that we would like to see. But some of the examples you've given are things like intellectual property violations, human rights violations in Hong Kong, a boat being turned around. I'm wondering whether your definition of peace is a little too limited.
So I would define peace in the exact same way President Reagan would, which is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. So I would undoubtedly consider what China is doing to its minority populations a form of conflict, a brutal one at that, a genocide. And our inability to handle that through peaceful means shows us that there isn't peace in China. I would consider China stationing a naval fleet off the coast of a major US ally a conflict, and one that we haven't been able to handle by peaceful means. Pretty much every example I brought up would in some way be considered by President Reagan a conflict. And I think if you look at Reagan's foreign policy, he saw peace as ultimately the procurement of democracy across the world. And for that reason, I think that undoubtedly we need more of an economically investment-oriented approach in order to create that peace.
This is a fantastic debate. I think your answers to the questions in particular have really helped flesh out your arguments. I'm going to start with Laurel. You both talked about the defense budget as an indicator when we consider our national strength. You talked additionally about our economic strength as an important measure there as well. One thing I haven't heard you talk about is the strength of our values, which is something, of course, President Reagan talked about quite a bit during his presidency. Can you clarify whether you think that we should define strength in a narrow way that has to do with military and economic strength, or should we have a more expansive view of what that means?
Absolutely a more expansive view. I think when we're looking at strength, one of the things that has made America so attractive to the rest of the world has been that it's a beacon of freedom, of democracy, of situations where people can come and make something out of themselves, opportunities that they don't have, for example, in potentially their home countries. A more broader definition of America's strength directly does stem from this ideal of democracy that our founding fathers established, this ideal of democracy that President Reagan was such a proud proponent of. That's the advantage that the United States has at the end of the day when we're stripping it all down to the basics. That's the advantage that our country has over China and over Russia, which many people will consider our rival superpowers. The advantage that we have is we are the land of the free and the home of the brave, something that no other country in the world has. That is our strength of reputation. That is our strength that has drawn so many people to our American cause and built us up so many allies. So absolutely, that, in addition to the military and economy, and even overshadowing our military and economy, is why so many people come to us, why so many people come to negotiate with us.
Gabriel, I think part of the core disagreement between you two is not just over whether peace through strength is as valid today as it was in the 1980s, but your presumptions or your assumptions going into that question are clearly different. Laurel says we should prioritize our competition with China, and you say terrorism is the greatest threat that we face. The latest two administrations, bipartisan, President Biden and President Trump, both agree with Laurel that China is the greatest threat we face. I'm curious if you have a principled disagreement on peace through strength's validity today, or is it reliant on your assumption that terrorism is the greatest threat we face? So my question is, if China was the greatest threat we face, would you still make the same argument that peace through strength is not as valid today?
Yes, I would. And let me clarify my argument a little bit there. I think terrorism is the most tangible threat to the peace of Americans. So undoubtedly, there haven't been any Americans who have died directly in combat with China. There have been hundreds of thousands who have died or been affected by terrorism. So when I said that terrorism is our #1 foreign policy enemy, I mean in the threat that it poses to American lives. I actually agree pretty much with Laurel that China is a major threat to the United States and probably should be our biggest sort of tangible enemy in our foreign policy realm. But as I talked about, we've increased military funding by $200 billion. We've doubled our cybersecurity budget. We've increased funding for space, yet none of it's worked. China's continued to encroach in territory in the South China Sea. They've continued to encroach in territory by India. Russia's done the same with Georgia and Crimea. In our economically interconnected world that President Reagan created, I just have a fundamental disagreement that peace through strength is equally valid today.
All right, thank you all. If everyone's ready, go ahead and get started. At the recommissioning ceremony for the USS New Jersey that President Reagan attended and spoke at in 1982, he said the following: "The cost of military fortification may be high, but the price of neglect is infinitely higher. As the United States of America, we have a reputation, an ideal, and a world to defend. A world of freedom and democracy that America has stood as a bulwark and a proponent for. And we can defend this in a variety of ways. Military, of course, is the first that comes to mind, but let's make sure to keep our minds open, because President Reagan's policy of peace through strength is and was just that, open. We've discussed this earlier, how when he first introduced peace through strength, he told us that peace through strength was a situation that involved economic, military, and strategic aims. Peace through strength encompassed an all-encompassing approach. And Gabriel here today has mentioned, yes, some military shortcomings, but we've already brought forth military successes. We've eliminated large-scale conflict as we knew it when it came to the world wars, something that has not been broken ever since President Ronald Reagan engaged in this peace through strength. Moreover, we've also begun to fight back in this situation of our war on terror, and although this war may not be over yet, we are well on our way thanks to peace through strength. There has not been another 9/11, and although terrorism may continue to spread across the world, the American military and American economy are one of the largest barriers the rest of the world has against it. Peace through strength is justified if it saves only one life against the forces of terror. We cannot let another life be lost towards this situation, and it's the United States that stands as a protector here. My opponent would have you believe that peace through strength is a fast-acting force that as soon as it's engaged, it resolves the problem. Not so. Peace through strength is a progressive force that takes time and energy to build up. For example, he tells you that we had one summit with China and walked away empty-handed. Well, President Reagan walked away empty-handed countless times. But in the end, the Berlin Wall fell. Peace through strength, with its strategy and economy and military, takes time to coalesce in a force of victory. But in the end, it always does. Yes, Russia may have invaded Crimea. The USSR invaded Afghanistan. The USSR still fell. We're in a constant journey to be better because that is part of the American dream, building up towards a future where we can build a world that is safe for us and our children. President Reagan put it best. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We will preserve for our children this, the last best hope of mankind on earth, or sentence them to take the first step into 1,000 years of darkness. I, for one, am a proponent of going to this destiny with open arms, and these open arms include the all-encompassing peace through strength that is so valid and justified today. Because if we can bring any one more country into freedom, any one more people out of this darkness into light, it will have well been worth it. Thank you.
At the end of today's debate, I think Laurel and I agree more than we disagree. I think we both agree that China is a threat that needs to be stopped. I think we both agree that terrorism is a threat that needs to be stopped. And I think that we both agree there is some need for military presence in the modern world. But this debate is not between one world with military strength or any other sort of strength and one world without it. This debate is between whether or not peace through strength is as effective in today's world as it was in President Reagan's world. We're not doing a comparison between a hypothetical world and today's. We're doing a comparison between today's world and President Reagan's. So, if there is one example where peace through strength is not valid today when it would have been in President Reagan's term, then, by definition, peace through strength isn't as valid today as it was in President Reagan's time, and you must side with the negative. So, here's the 3 examples that Laurel has failed to respond to. Firstly, Russia. They invaded part of Georgia and Crimea. These are both US allies, and our military strength wasn't able to deter them. China. They invaded Kashmir, territory claimed by India, a major US ally, and they sent a warship that drove away a US warship off the coast of the Philippines, another major ally. And of course, terrorism, which, while Laurel says it will take a while to combat, it did not take President Reagan 20 years for peace through strength to work. It took a decade. Yet, in the Middle East, we've spent over 2 decades, and we've only seen less peace despite our greater strength. If you believe any of those examples, then you have to side with the negative. Because in the Middle East, we've been there, we've done that, we have tried military intervention, and it simply hasn't worked. And for that reason, whether you believe my examples about Russia, or whether you believe my examples about China, or whether you believe that our American soldiers in the Middle East deserve to go home because they unfortunately have not been able to bring true peace to the region, then you have to side with the negative. Because President Reagan created a new world, an economically interconnected world on the principle of free trade. And I am confident that if President Reagan were alive today, his foreign policy would not be built upon military strength as it was in his time. It would be built upon utilizing free trade in Africa and the Middle East, not strength and not intervention, in order to promote what he saw as peace, which, remember, is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to deter conflict through peaceful means. We haven't been able to deter conflict with China in the South China Sea, or with China and India, or with Russia in Eastern Europe. And for that reason, his principle, unfortunately, is simply not as valid today as it was in his time.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for that remarkable final round. I'm now actually going to invite you to take a seat in the audience because we're going to give our judges here a chance to write some comments and to decide on their final vote. And I also want to explain the voting process to everyone in the audience, both in person and online. So thank you both. So while our judges are finishing their remarks and casting their ballots for the winner, I want to invite those of you with smartphones to help us cast the audience vote. I guess if you have a smartphone, you can use it. If you have a laptop, if you have one of those old database computers that took up an entire room, you can use that too. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to ask you to go to menti.com. So for those of you who are here, you can see it, menti.com. I'm going to pull mine out and do it too, menti.com. And when you get to menti.com, it's going to ask you to enter a code. And I'll repeat that code a couple of times, both for our in-person audience and online. But the code is 5910-5747. Everything's working well here. My only hope is that China and Russia have not hacked into this. And so just remember, your options there are affirmative and negative. Remember, Laurel was arguing the side of the affirmative, Gabriel the side of the negative. So go ahead, cast your vote, and hit submit. Give everybody just a minute to do that. If you're like me at all, you're probably hearing the Jeopardy theme music in your head as we await. If not, maybe I've planted that sound in there right now. So while we are waiting for our judges to finish up their comments and cast their final ballots and for everybody to submit their online vote, we're going to invite to the stage a few of our Great Communicator Debate Series national finalists who qualified and competed last year virtually due to the coronavirus, but have joined us here this year. So we want to honor that and celebrate them. So as I introduce each of you, what I'll ask you to do is I'll ask you to come up on stage, and we're going to remain on stage for a quick group photo together. We'll probably skip the handshakes, and that's okay. We're still going to appreciate you, and my colleague Megan's going to come up here and hand off a little gift that we have for you. So first up, Arnav Paliwal. Arnav graduated from Amity High School in Woodbridge, Connecticut this year and will be attending Carnegie Mellon University in the fall to study statistics and machine learning. So congratulations and welcome, Arnav. And I also want to thank them. In addition to being part of this retreat today, they were running ballots and really helping us behind the scenes. So thank you very much, Arnav. Next up, Zach Hines. Zach graduated from Madison West High School in Wisconsin last year and now attends the University of Wisconsin-Madison and is majoring in economics. So congratulations and thank you, Zach. Next up is Aubrey Weberg. Aubrey is going to be a sophomore at the University of Dallas, pursuing a dual degree in politics and economics. She's passionate about multicultural issues and systemic justice-oriented reforms. This past April, Aubrey started a community organization called the Dallas Refugee Project, where she turned that passion into tangible action. So congratulations, Aubrey. And last but not least, Joshua Hansen. Josh recently graduated from Jackson Hole Community High School in Wyoming, and in the fall he'll be attending Harvard University to major in government. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that today is his 18th birthday. What better way to celebrate? Happy birthday to you. And so we're going to ask them to remain just 1 second longer because we also have two other debaters who were here last year. But they also qualified this year, so they're going to have to come up on stage twice because that's how we roll. It's been a long time since we've been able to gather in person, so just roll with us here. So our next two debaters qualified last year and this year, and so I'll tell you a little bit more about them. But first up, Eugene Kong. Eugene is a graduate of 7-Star Academy and qualified this year at our Western Regional Competition. So Eugene, congratulations. And last but not least, Rashik Bethi. Rashik qualified at our Greater Texas Regional Competition and graduated this year from Carroll Senior High School in Texas. So congratulations, Rashik. So take one more group photo here. Excellent, thank you very much. So I will invite you to return to your seats. I'm going to see, are we ready? Okay. Talk amongst yourselves for 1 minute. I'm going to go off stage and make sure I know what's going on here next. Excellent. Sure. Thank you very much. All right, we've checked the ballot integrity on those. They're doing well. Okay. Here we go. So before we announce our national champion, we're going to have the two of you sit there for just a little bit longer. We want to recognize all of our 2021 national finalists from across the country. So I will invite our final round judges to the stage. So we're going to present them with their trophies and talk a little bit about them, and then we'll take a photo. So judges, if you could join me on stage here. So debaters, when you hear your name, please make your way up to the stage to get your award from Megan, and join the judges on the stage for a quick photo. And we're nodding instead of handshake. We're going to shake our heads as opposed to our hands. All right, so first up, we're going to invite to the stage our national finalists who are being awarded a $750 scholarship this evening. So I want to point out that in addition to this scholarship, all of the national finalists are also eligible for a scholarship of no less than $3,000 if they choose to attend our program in Washington, D.C., LTAP, which is Leadership in the American Presidency. So if you decide at some point during your college career you want to join us in Washington, D.C., there are additional scholarship dollars that are yours for the taking. So first up, $750 scholarship this evening. A rising junior from Scarsdale High School in New York. Although he's not completely sure what major he plans to pursue, political science has always intrigued him. Please welcome and congratulate David Diao. Congratulations, David. And then go ahead and return to your seat. We'll bring everybody back up at the end. For each one of these, we'll honor you individually. Next up, from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, graduated from the Virtual Learning Academy Charter School this past year. She'll be attending Great Bay Community College to study general liberal arts before transferring to a four-year institution. Laura Lee Godfrey. Next up, from Wantagh, New York, a recent graduate of Chaminade High School in June. He'll be attending the Gabelli School of Business at Fordham University in New York. He credits his argumentative skills were developed from sharing a room with his brother. Please welcome Michael Balia. Congratulations. Next up, from Glendale, California, where she's a rising junior at Crescenta Valley High School. She intends to major in business and finance when she attends a college after graduating. A fun fact is that she dressed up and did a presentation as Ronald Reagan for her 6th grade wax museum project. Please welcome Vienna Panassian. Next up, a graduate of Green River High School in Wyoming. She'll be attending the University of Wyoming and majoring in political science and philosophy. Please welcome Jessica Petrie. Next up, an incoming junior at Stamford High School in Connecticut. He has a passion for law and had the opportunity to argue in front of the Connecticut State Supreme Court. Ryan Shostak. Next up, from Charlotte, North Carolina, a rising senior at Myers Park High School. He hopes to major in political science and attend law school in the future. Please welcome Alex Naper. And last but not least in this particular scholarship level, from Corpus Christi, Texas, a recent graduate of W.B. Ray High School, Genevieve will be attending Princeton University in the fall and is majoring in the School of Public and International Affairs. Genevieve Cox. Next up, we'll be recognizing our quarterfinalists, each of whom will receive a scholarship of $1,250. So an incoming junior at August Wilson High School in Washington, D.C., a multi-talented student who plays 3 sports competitively, lacrosse, soccer, and track, Rebecca Curry. Next up, a graduate from 7 Star Academy from LA, California. In the fall, he'll be attending the University of California at San Diego to study biology, Eugene Kong. Congratulations, Eugene. Next up, a rising junior at Milton Academy in Massachusetts. He plans to double major in anthropology and economics in college before attending law school. John Yildirim. And last in this category of our quarterfinalists, a graduate of Henry Sibley High School in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He'll be attending American University and majoring in international relations, Aaron Rajput. And next up, we have 2 semifinalists who will each be receiving a $2,500 scholarship. So first up, an incoming senior at Agora High School in California. A fun fact about him is that his uncle and grandfather went horseback riding with Ronald Reagan. Please welcome Casey Simpson. And from Southlake, Texas, recently graduated from Carroll Senior High School, Rashik Bethy plans to study neuroscience at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee this fall. So welcome, Rashik. Okay, the moment we have all been waiting for. I'm going to invite our two final debaters to come up on stage and join me and the judges for our final announcement. While they're coming up here, I just want to commend both of them. For a truly remarkable final round, but also I want to commend this group of debaters, the camaraderie, the spirit and support you've shown for one another, despite the fact that you're competing against one another, has been really inspiring. So congratulations. All right, so tonight we all had the pleasure of watching these two world-class debaters try to persuade us to vote for them. It is now time to reveal who has been chosen to hold the prestigious title of the Next Great Communicator and champion of tonight's round. So our champion tonight will receive a $5,000 scholarship. The runner-up will receive a scholarship of $3,750. So I'll describe them both and then I'll announce the winner. So a rising senior from Gabrielino High School in San Gabriel, California. He hasn't yet chosen a university, but intends to double major in political science and economics. Gabriel, so congratulations on making it this far. And then Laurel is from Greenville, South Carolina, where she graduated as a proud Riverside Warrior from Riverside High School in Greer. Will be attending Duke University and looking to major in public policy and potentially global health. Was inspired to compete in this competition because her speech and debate coach, as she mentioned, is a huge Ronald Reagan fan and constantly uses his quotes as motivational reminders. Okay. Tonight, on a 4-1 vote, our $5,000 scholarship and national champion is Laurel Hawley. Congratulations. Excellent. Congratulations. So thank you all for supporting this competition. Congratulations to each and every one of our debaters this evening. We're going to start dinner in just a moment. So we're going to ask debaters, chaperones, and final round judges. We have reserved tables for you. There are table cards on the table over here. So if you're one of our debaters, chaperones, final round judges, we have them for you here. Everyone else, there's going to be seating below at non-reserved tables, but I am going to ask all of our national finalists to stick around. We're going to take some group photos here on the stage. And for our debaters, if anybody wants to purchase any photos from their time here over the last couple of days, the booth down below is open. So thank you everyone for joining us for the 2021 Great Communicator National Debate Series. Have a great dinner.